The Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, is unveiling a new multi-billion-dollar rail network.
Soldiers moved in under the cover of darkness. They seized control of the tracks, secured the perimeter, and effectively nationalized a private railway overnight. This wasn't a coup, it was the start of the biggest construction project in the Western Hemisphere. Mexico is racing against time to finish a coast-to-coast link that can outrun the Panama Canal.
Within a few years from now, after the project has been completed.
With the canal literally drying up and megaships stranded at sea, Mexico sees a golden opening. But get this, the United States and China are watching every move, and the stakes are higher than just moving shipping containers. The choke point in the death of water. Global trade is heading toward a cliff, and most people don't even see the edge. We rely on a shipping infrastructure that was engineered over a century ago, back when the biggest ships were a fraction of the size of the monsters sailing the oceans today. We are talking about vessels weighing 200,000 tons, carrying everything from your smartphone to the clothes on your back. These giants have outgrown the waterways meant to guide them. But here is the catch. The world keeps demanding more, and the old systems are starting to crack under the pressure. The epicenter of this crisis is the Panama Canal. For decades, it has been the undisputed king of maritime shortcuts. It is the bottleneck that controls the flow of goods between the Atlantic and Pacific. But in 2023, the king fell ill. The canal faced its worst drought in over 100 years. This isn't just about rain, it's about survival. The canal runs on fresh water. Millions of gallons are flushed out to sea with every single ship that passes through the locks. When the rain stops, the canal stops. The freshwater lakes that feed the locks, Lake Gatun and Alajuela, started to evaporate. These lakes are the batteries that power the entire system. Without that water, the laws of physics take over, and those massive ships simply cannot be lifted over the continent. Authorities had to slash the number of daily crossings. Ships that used to sail through like clockwork were suddenly stuck in lines stretching for miles into the ocean. We aren't talking about a few hours of delay, we are talking about days, sometimes weeks, of sitting idle, burning fuel and money. Shipping companies were trapped. They faced an impossible choice: wait in an endless queue and lose millions, or sail all the way around South America, navigating the treacherous Strait of Magellan or the rough waters of Cape Horn. That detour adds 8,000 miles and weeks to the journey. This isn't just a bad weather season, it is a structural failure. Every time a ship gets stuck, the price of your groceries, your electronics, and your construction materials creeps up. The supply chain is fragile, and it is breaking. But it gets worse. The modern fleet of neo-panamax ships, the titans of the sea, are so large that even under perfect conditions, they scrape the sides of the expanded canal locks. When the water levels drop even a few feet, these ships are banned completely. They are too heavy. They risk hitting the bottom. So the biggest movers of the global economy are effectively locked out of the world's most important shortcut. And while the world was wringing its hands over Panama, looking at the sky and praying for rain, Mexico made a move that stunned everyone. They didn't look for water, they looked for steel. In 2020, construction on a railway across the narrowest part of Mexico, the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, was stalling. There were legal battles, disputes with local communities, and bureaucratic nightmares. To the Mexican government, this wasn't just a construction delay, it was a threat to national security. They saw the chaos in Panama not as a warning, but as an invitation. So President López Obrador did the unthinkable. He authorized the military to seize the railway. Picture this: soldiers arriving at the depots in the middle of the night. Trucks loaded with troops rolling into small jungle towns. They took control of the disputed sections, secured the perimeter with automatic weapons, and effectively nationalized the infrastructure overnight. They turned a private asset into a strategic state possession in the blink of an eye. The backlash was immediate. Critics screamed about authoritarianism. Business groups warned that investors would flee. International observers called it a power grab. But the government didn't blink. Their message was crystal clear. This corridor is a matter of national survival. No private company, no lawsuit, and no delay would be allowed to stop it. They dubbed it a matter of national security, a legal term that allows them to bypass environmental impact studies and speed up construction. This wasn't just about fixing a train track, it was a signal to the entire planet. Mexico was declaring that they were all in on solving the global shipping crisis, whether the traditional powers liked their methods or not. They weren't asking for permission to sit at the table, they were building their own table. Basically, Mexico looked at the chaos in Panama and saw the opportunity of the century. They realized that if water is the problem, maybe the solution isn't a better canal. Maybe the solution is land. They are betting $5 billion that they can move cargo from the Pacific to the Atlantic faster than a ship can float through the locks. But to understand why this gamble is so huge, we have to look at the ghost of the past. Because believe it or not, Mexico has tried this before, and the reason it failed is darker than you think. And that is putting it lightly. The last time they tried this, the world changed overnight, leaving Mexico in the dust. The cursed corridor and the American shadow. It sounds crazy, but Mexico actually beat Panama to the punch over 100 years ago. The dream of crossing the Americas didn't start with the Panama Canal. It started right here, in the jungles of Tehuantepec. Back in 1907, 7 years before the Panama Canal opened its gates, Mexico was already moving cargo between the two oceans. The vision came from a man named Porfirio Diaz. He was the president of Mexico in the late 1800s, a man obsessed with modernization. He looked at the map and saw what the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés had seen 400 years earlier. The Isthmus of Tehuantepec is a narrow waistline where the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans almost touch. It is only about 180 miles wide. Diaz ordered engineers to build a railway across this jungle corridor. It was a massive undertaking for the time. They battled yellow fever, malaria, and the relentless jungle that tried to swallow the tracks as fast as they laid them. But by 1907, steam trains were chugging across the isthmus, hauling sugar, coffee, and manufactured goods. For a brief, shining moment, Mexico was the center of the world. Ports on both sides, Coatzacoalcos and Salina Cruz, were booming. Merchants were getting rich. It seemed like Mexico had secured its future as the master of global trade. But history has a cruel sense of humor and some say a hidden hand. In 1914, the Panama Canal officially opened. It was a marvel of engineering, a water bridge that allowed ships to sail right through the continent without ever stopping to unload. Almost overnight, the Mexican railway became obsolete. Why would a captain pay to dock his ship, unload his cargo onto a train, haul it across the mountains, and reload it onto another ship when he could just sail through Panama? It was a no-brainer. Traffic on the Mexican railway collapsed. The jungle began to reclaim the tracks. The ports rusted. The economic boom turned into a bust, and the region fell into poverty. It wasn't that the geography was bad, it was just that the technology of the canal was better. Mexico's window of opportunity slammed shut, and for the next century, the interoceanic corridor was nothing more than a memory, a rusting line of steel lost in the undergrowth. But here is where the story gets murky. Conspiracy theorists and some historians argue that the failure of the Tehuantepec line wasn't just bad luck, it was geopolitics. Go back to 1859. The United States was desperate for a route to California. They signed a treaty with Mexico called the McLean-Ocampo Treaty. This document, if it had been ratified, would have given the U.S. perpetual right of transit across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Basically, the U.S. would have owned the route. They would have had the right to send their military to protect it. It was almost a purchase of Mexican sovereignty. The treaty fell apart because of the U.S. Civil War, but the American interest remained. When the U.S. decided to build the canal in Panama, they made sure it was the only game in town. Some theories suggest that diplomatic pressure was applied to keep the Tehuantepec line from getting the foreign investment it needed to modernize. The U.S. wanted a monopoly on ocean-to-ocean transit, and they got it. So, for 100 years, the Isthmus of Tehuantepec sat there, ignored. A cursed route where every project went to die. Fast forward to 2018. The world is different. The U.S. monopoly on trade routes is slipping. Ships are massive beasts that can barely fit through the canal locks. The weather is unpredictable, and Mexico has a new leader with a hunger for legacy. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador dusted off the old maps and announced that the dead railway would rise again. But this time, the plan was so much bigger than just a few train tracks. This wasn't a renovation, it was a resurrection on steroids. The plan called for 3 major railway lines stretching over 600 miles. They aren't just patching up the old iron rails. They are building a modern transportation spine designed to carry heavy cargo at speeds old Porfirio Diaz could only dream of. But the locals tell a different story. They talk about the Shineks, mythological spirits of the jungle that protect the land. Workers have reported strange accidents, equipment vanishing, and an eerie feeling of being watched from the tree line. Is it superstition, or is it the resistance of a land that doesn't want to be tamed? The government ignored the myths and the history books. They poured concrete and laid steel. By December 2023, the first part of this dream became reality. Modern passenger trains started running, connecting the oceans in a matter of hours. It was a symbolic victory, proving that the line was alive. But symbols don't move shipping containers. The real test is the logistics. Can a train really compete with a ship? The government kept saying this wasn't about replacing Panama. They used diplomatic words like complementary route. But everyone in the shipping industry knew the truth. This is a fight. And as the first engines fired up, the engineers realized they weren't just fighting history, they were fighting the mud itself. The engineering nightmare and the monster machines. Let's get technical for a second. Building a railway across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec is not like building a track across the plains of Kansas. This is a nightmare of engineering. The terrain is a mix of swamp, jungle, and mountain. The soil in some areas is so soft that engineers call it pudding. You lay a track and a week later it has sunk 3 inches. To fix this, they have had to drive massive pilings deep into the earth, effectively building a bridge that sits on the ground. They are using high-tech geogrids and specialized ballast to keep the track stable under the immense weight of double-stacked container trains. And these aren't your average trains. Mexico is procuring what locals are calling the monsters. These are high-horsepower diesel-electric locomotives designed to pull massive loads up the steep grades of the Chivla Pass. The pass acts as a wind tunnel, where gusts can reach hurricane force even on a sunny day. In the past, trains were literally blown off the tracks. To combat this, they are building windbreaks and using heavier rolling stock with a lower center of gravity. But the railway is useless if the ships can't dock. So, the plan included massive expansions of the ports at Coatzacoalcos on the Gulf side and Salina Cruz on the Pacific. These aren't just fishing piers. They are being dredged to a depth of 24 meters. They are installing superpost Panamax cranes, giant steel giraffes that can reach across 24 rows of containers. The vision is simple but ambitious. A ship from China docks on the Pacific side. These cranes rip the containers off at lightning speed. We are talking 30 moves per hour. They are loaded onto a waiting train. The train shoots across the isthmus in a few hours. On the other side, a ship bound for New York or Europe is waiting. The containers are loaded up and off they go. But here's the kicker. It's called double handling. In the world of logistics, this is usually a dirty word. Every time you touch a container, pick it up, put it down, it costs money and risks damage. A ship going through Panama never unloads, it just floats. So the Mexican route is inherently more expensive per container in terms of handling fees. So how can they compete? The answer is time and volume. Crossing the Panama Canal isn't like driving through a tunnel. It takes 8 to 10 hours just to physically move through the locks. But that is only if you are at the front of the line. The real predator is the wait time. During peak seasons or droughts, ships can sit at anchor for days. Sometimes if you don't have a pre-booked slot, which costs a fortune, you can wait weeks. The Mexican corridor offers a green lane. The train ride takes 3 hours. Even with unloading and reloading, the total transit time is less than 48 hours. For a company shipping fresh avocados that spoil quickly, or the latest iPhones for a Christmas launch where every day counts, saving 3 or 4 days is worth the extra handling cost. Plus, there is the mega ship factor. The biggest ships afloat simply cannot fit in the Panama Canal. They have to sail around South America. Mexico offers them a shortcut. The ports are being built specifically for these giants. It creates a tiered system. The Panama Canal gets the medium ships, Mexico gets the monsters. But there is a shadow hanging over this engineering marvel. While digging through the jungle, workers have stumbled upon things the government isn't talking about. This brings us to the theories that you won't hear on the evening news. The secrets of the jungle. The user asked for wild theories, so let's dive into the rabbit hole. When you start digging up land that has been inhabited for thousands of years and you add global superpowers to the mix, things get weird. First, let's talk about what is under the mud. During the construction of the nearby Maya train, archaeologists found thousands of ancient structures. But on the interoceanic corridor, the news has been strangely silent. Why? Some locals and independent researchers believe they have found things that don't fit the official timeline. We are talking about massive pre-Hispanic settlements that suggest this trade route was used thousands of years ago, perhaps by civilizations we barely understand. The theory goes that the government is suppressing these finds to avoid halting construction. If they admitted they were bulldozing a major archaeological site, the project would stop dead. So the artifacts are vanished and the concrete is poured. Then there is the weather weapon theory. This one is out there, but it is gaining traction in the darker corners of the internet. The drought in Panama is historic. It is unprecedented. Some conspiracy theorists are asking, is it natural? They point to cloud seeding technologies and geoengineering programs that have been around since the Vietnam War. The theory suggests that powers interested in weakening U.S. influence, or perhaps promoting the Mexican route, could be manipulating weather patterns to ensure the Panama Canal remains dry. It sounds like science fiction, and scientifically it is highly unlikely that anyone can control the weather with that precision. But in a world of high-stakes trade wars, people will believe anything that explains the impossible. And what about the cargo itself? One of the most persistent rumors is that the corridor is being built not just for TVs and sneakers, but for something much more dangerous: nuclear waste and strategic minerals. The U.S. has a problem with nuclear waste storage. Moving it is a nightmare. Some theorists speculate that a secret clause in the security agreements allows for the transport of hazardous materials across the isthmus, destined for disposal sites in the Pacific or processing in Asia. The heavy military presence, the Navy controlling the ports, the National Guard on the tracks, adds fuel to this fire. Why do you need thousands of troops to guard a shipment of bananas? Unless the bananas are glowing. There is also the Tesla connection. Elon Musk built a massive factory in northern Mexico. Other car manufacturers are flocking there. Is this corridor the backbone of a new North American electric vehicle empire? The theory is that the corridor will be used to transport lithium from South America directly to these factories, bypassing the slow canal and creating a vertically integrated battery supply chain that cuts China out of the loop. Or conversely, that it gives China a backdoor to dump cheap EVs into the US market. Finally, there is the shadow tax. We have to talk about the cartels. This region of Mexico is a patchwork of territories controlled by various criminal organizations. A train line is a sitting duck. The official line is that the military is there to stop theft. But the wild theory is that the cartels have already negotiated a cut, a shadow tax on every container that moves. If this is true, the cartels would become international trade gatekeepers, holding the global supply chain hostage whenever they want to raise. The government denies all of this, of course. They say the military is there for national sovereignty. They say the weather is just climate change. They say the archaeology is being respected. But when billions of dollars are on the line, the truth is usually the first casualty. The dragon in the backyard. Now we move from conspiracy to cold, hard geopolitics. This is the part that keeps generals in the Pentagon awake at night. For over a century, the Panama Canal has been the backyard of the United States. The U.S. built it, controlled it, and still treats it as a critical strategic asset. It allows the U.S. Navy to move fleets between oceans rapidly. It is the jugular vein of American naval power. Now, look at the map. Mexico is building a rival route right next door. And who is the biggest potential customer? China. China has been aggressively expanding its influence in Latin America through its Belt and Road Initiative. They have built ports in Peru, bridges in Panama, and dams in Ecuador. They see the Mexican corridor as a golden ticket. Why? Because the Panama Canal is too American. If a war broke out over Taiwan, the U.S. could easily shut down the Panama Canal to Chinese ships. But Mexico? Mexico is neutral. A Mexican railway offers China a sanctions-proof route to move goods into the Americas. Rumors have been flying that Chinese state-owned companies are in talks to manage the terminals or invest heavily in the 10 industrial parks springing up along the railway. Data shows that container volumes from China to Mexico jumped by over 60% in the first half of 2024. That is a massive spike. It suggests that Chinese companies are already positioning themselves to use Mexico as their primary gateway into North America, bypassing U.S. West Coast ports that are prone to strikes and congestion. This puts the United States in a bind. On one hand, the U.S. wants a strong Mexican economy. A prosperous southern neighbor means fewer migrants and a more stable region. Plus, American companies need resilient supply chains. They don't want their goods stuck in Panama either. So, a working Mexican corridor is actually good for U.S. business. On the other hand, the idea of Chinese influence controlling a strategic choke point just a few hundred miles from the Texas border is a nightmare for Washington. It challenges the Monroe Doctrine, the old idea that the Western Hemisphere is off limits to foreign powers. You have this high-stakes dance happening. U.S. officials are holding high-level meetings with Mexico, talking about integration and cooperation. They want to make sure that the corridor stays firmly within the North American family. They are pressuring Mexico to screen investments to keep the dragon out of the control room. Meanwhile, Mexico is playing it cool. President López Obrador framed this project as an act of sovereignty. He wants Mexico to stand on its own 2 feet, not just be a sidekick to the U.S. or a pawn for China. He is using China's interest as leverage to get better deals from the U.S. It's a dangerous game of poker. And it is not just the superpowers who are worried. Panama is sweating bullets. Their entire economy is built on canal fees. If they lose even 10 or 20% of their traffic to Mexico, it blows a hole in their national budget. They are watching their monopoly evaporate in real time. This is sparking a regional conversation about competition. It forces Panama to innovate, to lower prices, to find new ways to stay relevant. Basically, the Mexican corridor has shattered the status quo. It has turned a static map into a dynamic battlefield. We are moving from a world with one main gate to a world with multiple back doors and side entrances. But what happens when the dust settles? What does the world look like in 5 years when this corridor is running at full steam? The future and the verdict. Let's fast forward. It is 2030. The dust has settled. The cranes at Coatzacoalcos and Salina Cruz are moving nonstop. The trains are running on a tight schedule, shooting across the isthmus like steel arrows. If Mexico pulls this off, the corridor will be handling tens of millions of tons of cargo every year. We aren't talking about a trickle, we are talking about a flood. The region of southern Mexico, historically the poorest part of the country, would be transformed. We would see factories, assembly plants, and logistics hubs lining the tracks. The Made in Mexico label would become even more dominant on American shelves. For the shipping industry, the nightmare of the single point of failure would be over. A drought in Panama would be a nuisance, not a catastrophe. A political crisis in one country wouldn't stop global trade. The supply chain would finally have the redundancy it has desperately needed for decades. But that is the optimistic view. There is a darker timeline. The environmental cost could be devastating. This project cuts through the Chimalpas, one of the most biodiverse regions on the continent. Scientists warn that fragmenting this habitat could lead to the extinction of jaguar populations and the collapse of local ecosystems. Mexico has to prove that they can build the future without destroying the lung of the region. Then there is the social unrest. The indigenous communities of the isthmus have a long history of resistance. They fought the Spanish, they fought the French, and they will fight the train if they feel they are being exploited. If the development poles, the industrial parks, turn into sweatshops that don't benefit the locals, the tracks will be blocked by protesters. We have seen it happen before. A train can't move if the people lying on the tracks refuse to leave. And let's not forget the Panama Canal itself. They aren't going to roll over and die. They are already exploring plans to dam the Indio River to create a new water reservoir. They are looking at water recycling systems. Competition drives innovation. The most likely outcome isn't that Mexico eliminates the Panama Canal, but that they force it to evolve. So let's bring it back down to earth. What does this mean for you? It means the next time you order a package, it might take a very different route to get to your door. It means the global economy is getting a little bit more complex, a little bit more resilient, and a lot more competitive. Mexico shocked the world not by inventing some sci-fi technology, but by looking at a map and realizing that geography is destiny. They took on the impossible. They challenged history, and they forced the world to pay attention. The tracks are laid. The ports are open. The ships are coming. Mexico has placed its bet on the table, and it is a massive one. Now we just have to wait and see if the gamble pays off or if the jungle claims the tracks once again. So here's the question that should keep you up at night. If the global supply chain shifts to Mexico, does that make North America stronger, or does it just open a new door for global rivals to step right into our backyard? Hit that like button if you learned something new and subscribe to see how this story ends. You won't want to miss what happens next.